If there's not, I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Well, good evening. I'm going to be brief because Tennessee kicks off at 7. I'd like everyone to see that. But I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about some opportunity coming toward us with some of the CTE funding that was in the governor's budget. So you're probably aware the General Assembly approved the governor's budget that included a $500 million investment in CTE. That is to be spread over 4 years' time. LEAs can apply for funds for CTE programming grades 6 through 12. In a nutshell, 9 through 12 schools that serve more than 100 students are eligible for up to $1 million. 6 through 8 schools serving more than 100 eligible up to $500,000. And combination schools serving less than 100 qualify for up to $200,000. So in Hawkins County, that translates to $4.2 million worth of eligibility across our middle and high schools, including the clinches and combination schools serving less than 100. And that's less than 100 in grades 6 through 12. So those would be allocated over 4 years. There unfortunately was a 10% cap on capital projects. When we first heard about this funding, we were really hopeful that we'd be able to pull a bulk of this funding and dedicate it to the central CTE facility that we've discussed in the past. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's a possibility. There is some leeway. The state said they will allow us to spend more than 25% during year 1, 2, or 3 with justification. They will allow us to spend in excess of 10% on capital projects with justification, but it's still limited. So that's the breakdown by school of Hawkins County's estimated allocation. Pretty straightforward there for all the middle schools, 500,000, Clinch being at 200,000, and both of the 2 large high schools at 1 million. So the plan, as it stands today, and this is subject to change, our application is due in February. We hope to get it completed and turned in much sooner than that, but we have until February. The plan as of today is to expand into the middle schools with career exploration classes in grades 6 through 8. So that would include an instructor for each of the middle schools. And equipment for career exploration like STEM equipment, robotics, simulators, virtual reality, that kind of stuff. At the high schools, and this is what we really wanted to talk to you about this evening, to spend $1 million and we're capped at 10% in capital, if we don't get into a lot of staffing, it's difficult to spend $1 million on equipment. They won't let us do that anyway. So we're looking at potential shop space expansion. So I'm sure you're probably wondering why would we look at that if we're looking at the central CTE facility that fits in. And we are not giving up on that project by any means, but the reality is we are a long way away from the finish line of what we're going to have to break ground on that facility. This money is on the table now, and we need to take advantage of it because this is likely a once-in-a-lifetime injection of funding into CTE for everyone in the room. So we're looking at potential shop space expansion and the addition of a program at Cherokee, most likely a welding program, and a volunteer, most likely a machine tool program. That's subject to change and depend on labor market data as always and advisory council input. Then at the district-wide level, something I'm really excited about, a work-based learning coordinator for the district, someone who has the sole responsibility of making connections and partnerships with business and industry and getting our students placed in internships and meaningful capstone experiences for their CTE coursework. And a CTE data coordinator individual to help us track some of the information we're going to have to track for all the reporting tied to these funds as well as the other CTE initiatives that we have going on as well. So with that being said, we're proposing a capital project here that, on this photo, the yellow boxes are areas on the campus of Cherokee that I feel like if we wanted to, we likely could build something. The two red boxes, I believe, are the most suitable or feasible locations for a shop expansion that's a connection to the CTE building on campus already. That's about a 5,000 square foot shop expansion. That's enough room for 2 new shops and integrated classroom within the shop space itself. At Clinch, a lab space addition. I'm excited about this. I think it would be a tremendous addition to that facility to expand the lab space that could house various equipment to allow CTE opportunities for students there. And then there again at Volunteer, the yellow spaces are some potential sites, but the blue and the orange are the two spaces that make the most sense, just in terms of the flow of the building and campus as it's laid out. Of course, all this is subject to suitability of the ground and all that, but that's kind of what we're looking at. So what I'm here to ask you is about the funding for this. We're thinking now, you folks from the media, these are projections, please underscore. We're thinking about $3.9 million if we were to do those expansions. We can't pull $3.9 million out of innovative schools funds that we just discussed. That's way above the 10% cap. The state's almost certain to shoot that down. So we're guaranteed we can spend at least $220,000 out of innovative schools funds on capital projects. Most likely we could go as high as $660,000. That's about 30% of the overall allocation for the 3 schools we're discussing. Earlier last year, and I don't recall the month, but the board committed up to $2 million to the central CTE facility if and when that time comes to get that project started. I don't want to give the impression that we're giving up on that. We're not. We're still working on it. We're still looking at different avenues, but it's a long way down the road. Because this money's on the table now, we have the opportunity to expand programs in a year or so. I'm asking you to consider, with that commitment that the board made previously, keep that commitment in place to expand CTE programs, but give us a little more flexibility to dedicate that funding toward this project if that's the route we need to go. If we can't find a way to get to the central CTE facility, would the board consider committing the $2 million to this project in lieu of the central CTE facility? If the board does that, we will likely go to the county commission and ask the same. The county commission agreed to match the $2 million from the Board of Education. If that's successful, that put us at a $4 million starting point plus whatever we can bring out of innovative schools. And I believe we feel pretty good about the projections of the estimated cost to construct these additions, that'll put us over the finish line and we can actually get started breaking ground quickly and expand programming and get that opportunity to our students. So here's a quick breakdown of the staffing. Like I said, 4 positions for middle schools, Bulls Gap, Churchill, RMS, and SMS for career exploration. The model at Clinch would likely look a little different. Based on the small number of class sizes, we would probably look at a staff member already on staff and paying an additional stipend. 2 high school instructors, work-based learning coordinator, and data accountability coordinator. Innovative schools model, the staffing cost estimate's a little over $600,000 a year. We can pay 100% of that out of the grant funds year 1, and then it steps down 25% year over year. That's a little scary at first, but when you look at the sustainability of this, and that's part of the application, it's actually not that scary. With the new TISA formula and the CTE projected funds generated through CTE enrollment, The staffing, when we hit year 5 and we are responsible for 100% of that cost, is only 36% of our base CTE estimate. And that base number is likely very inaccurate because it does not include any bonuses for industry credentials, upper level tiered coursework, those kinds of things. It also doesn't take into account the fact that we're going to dramatically increase our enrollment with pushing into grades 6 through 8 at each of the middle schools, as well as open 2 new programs at the 2 high schools. So I feel confident the staffing is extremely sustainable. I'm not really all that concerned about that. So with that being said, I'm going to be quiet and sit down now when we have here a reasonable time. Unless you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
We'll come back with the questions. It's on our agenda under new business. But we need to make some decisions. I think the question at hand is, can this board commit up to $2 million for the expansion?
That $2 million is not in addition to what the board had allowed us to potentially use on the centralized project. We're just asking this evening, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, we're just asking this evening for some flexibility to pursue other options, as mentioned this evening, so that we can make immediate use of those innovative school grant monies that are coming over the next 4 years.
I got a question. If that 25% you were talking about on the cap rate, on the capital project stuff, if that you said it ran over years, like, I don't know how the money's allocated, but you said over the first 3 years you could potentially get up to 25%. If you ran that math, like, is it even getting close to that CTE building? I didn't know, like, what the math would look like.
The 25% cap is the overall allocation is going to be divvied up 25% per year for the next 4 years. They will allow us to request more than 25% in year 1, 2, or 3. Can't request more than 25%. Well, I guess you could request more than 25% in year 4 if you haven't spent 75% in the previous 3 years. But it's just 25% of the overall allocation. So volunteer, for instance, would be $250,000 a year for 4 years. If we were going to pull funding for a capital project, if, let's say, as it stands right now, if the application that we have drafted doesn't change a lot, we'll likely request about 30% to go toward a capital project, which will require authorization since it goes above the 10% cap. We would likely request to spend more than the 25% overall allocation in either year 1 or 2, depending on how quickly we could get contractors moving and when pay apps were coming in for payments toward the building expansion. We would need to front load, and the state understands that we would need to front load if we're doing a capital project, likely going to be a significant cost in year 1 and 2, or maybe 2 and 3, to expand space, add staffing, and start up equipment for a welding program or a machine tool program. That's a lot of money. So they're willing to let us do that, just requires authorization. But the unfortunate thing is, as far as the central site and pulling funding from this, we're still limited to, let's say, we're going to ask probably for 30% capital, which is going to require permission. That just limits us still to about $660,000, because we would only be able to pull out of the budget for the 3 high schools, unless we were serving middle school grades at that building. And that's not something we've discussed. I don't know that it's something that would be real feasible. So
that money does follow the schools, like
it has to, yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm. But that 4.2, you said it's available. Is it like pretty much there? Do we have to apply and hope to get it? Or?
No, it's not a competitive grant. So if our application makes a strong enough case, that's what we will receive. And it will make a strong enough case.
What time frame are we looking at with that grant? It is like the jump off from?
So The application,
Well, the process, before you start having to look for money, bringing in money, our money.
Because year 5
well, for staffing, that'd be,
for staff.
actually starts in year 2, but that'll be pulled from the TISA CTE generated funding. So it really shouldn't impact our overall budget. It should be, I think we're gonna be budget positive on CTE, but at worst, we're gonna be budget neutral with staffing increases based on the additional funds generated through TISA. As far as capital project, when that would kick off, if the board took action tonight and said that we could have the flexibility to use this funding for construction at the high schools, my recommendation would be, as we're approaching the application being submitted, if the county commission is on board as well, and we feel comfortable that we're gonna have enough to get across the finish line, then we go ahead with engineering and design so that we can get a head start on breaking ground and getting construction completed. So timeline realistically would be hopefully by the end of this school year, be contracting with our architect for engineering and design, and then as quickly as possible get the ball rolling for putting projects out for bid and actually breaking ground.
And this does not replace the idea of a centralized facility. It just gives us the option to pursue either one, should one stand out as a better course of action for us. Because either way, we're able to expand CT offerings and make use of that TISA funding when it comes available in 23-24.
So in essence, we're just transitioning that $2 million that we've committed to expansion at the high school.
Either plan.
Either or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How will it be determined if you're gonna add on or build?
Well, I think we still have a few cards on the table for the central site. I wouldn't be willing to put a percentage bet on it at this point, but we are still working on that, you know. But if those don't pan out, the reality is the innovative funding is on the table, and although we're limited on how much we can pull for capital, it will allow us for the staffing and the equipment startup that would be needed to expand programming if we can find space, which is, you know, that problem has not gone away. We're out of space. So this would just give us a little bit of flexibility, and in terms of strengthening the Innovative Schools application so that it is fully funded, if we can show that the board and hopefully county commission is committing funding to a capital project expansion, it should bolster our chances of having a successful application requesting additional funds out of that capital.
But the reason I ask that is if we were to build structures, two new structures, and then did the centralized one, would those buildings still be useful, or what would happen after that?
It would, yes. We're busting at the seams as it is with shop space. Even if we did this and 5 years down the road we're able to construct the central facility, I don't foresee that would be an ill investment. It's still a good investment. We're going to be able to offer additional programming. We may shift some of the programming around for whatever makes the most sense to serve the entire county. You know, locate things at the central site that are only offered one place or whatever, but it would not be wasted space.
So it's before this board for the recommitment of up to $2 million on use either at the standalone site or the expansion.
When's the application due?
February. And as in the past, when the board made this commitment before, you're not actually moving any money with this. It's a verbal commitment. It's something that we can use in the application to show that we have commitment. So we'll have a chance later down the road, once we make the determination of are we sticking with central facility or are we moving forward with construction at the individual sites. And at that point, we'd be asking you to take action in terms of moving dollars into the correct line items for this project.
Well,
If that puts your mind at ease at all, it's,
we're moving,
versus
we're moving forward, and if there's no further discussion, if there's not, I'd like to go ahead and make the motion to approve these funds for the purpose of CTE expansion or a standalone facility again, because I think there's more funding coming. I think there's going to be some more funding coming. We as a school board and as a school system are making a very big commitment to CTE, and we need to do that. We need to. So that would be my motion,
I will second.
and we have a second.
There's a huge, I just want to sling my support for that. There's a huge pipeline right now with the state of Tennessee to support CTE. This Innovative Schools Models Grant is the first wave of that, and it may be the last wave. So if we can capitalize on this and grow our CTE programs to realistic space to allow us to expand, whether it's at the centralized facility or at the existing school sites, we can capitalize not only on the Innovative Schools Grant money, but also the money that comes through expanded enrollment in CTE through TISA. Because as you remember in the new TISA model, one of the weights that pays districts more or funds them more is through the CTE expansion. So we would look to expand our middle schools all the way up through high schools. Unfortunately, either model is required, either the centralized site or the expansion at the high schools, in order for us to expand our current offerings, because we are limited on space. So this, if the board takes action and approves this evening, would allow us the ability to pursue one of those avenues for the potential increased funding line to support our needed growth.
They're saying that they did this expansion.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second.
No, they're creating an option between one or the other.
No further discussion. Ms. Jennifer, call the roll, please.
Loner.
Yes. Shannon.
Yes.
Gorlova.
Yes.
Craddock.
Yes.
Christian.
Yes.
Charles.
yes.
Boyd.
Yes.
Make it happen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Brandon.
Thank you.